From the outside, my life appeared flawless. I had a devoted husband, financial security, and a home that embodied success. Everything seemed to be in place, yet beneath the surface a growing emptiness lingered. My marriage had settled into a predictable rhythm, comfortable but distant. The warmth we once shared had faded into routine conversations and obligations. Love still existed, but the passion that once made my heart race had become a distant memory. Among the many aspects of my structured life was my driver, a man who had been with us for years. He was reliable, polite, and blended into the background of my daily routine. He knew my habits, my schedule, and the smallest details of my preferences, yet I had never truly noticed him beyond his role. He was simply there, a presence I acknowledged but never truly considered. That changed one evening after a social event. My husband had left early due to work obligations, leaving me to attend alone. I stayed longer than expected, enjoying the escape from the monotony of my home life. By the time I was ready to leave, exhaustion weighed heavily on me. I slid into the back seat of the car, grateful for the solitude, but the quiet soon became unbearable. For the first time I struck up a conversation with my driver beyond the usual pleasantries. His responses were measured, thoughtful, and more engaging than I had anticipated. I found myself unexpectedly drawn into our exchange. He listened intently, his words filled with a quiet understanding that caught me off guard. There was no pretense, no forced politeness, just an easy, unguarded dialogue that felt strangely refreshing. Something shifted that night, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. It was subtle, unspoken, yet undeniable. A familiarity I hadn't acknowledged before had begun to take shape. As I stepped out of the car and into my home, a lingering thought followed me inside. It wasn't anything grand or dramatic, just a simple realization. I had noticed him. And, for the first time, I wondered if he had always noticed me too. The silence in my marriage had become louder than any argument ever could. My husband and I lived in the same house, shared the same bed, but we might as well have been strangers. Conversations were reduced to necessities, brief exchanges about schedules, obligations, and responsibilities. The warmth we once had was now buried under years of routine and distance. I wasn't unhappy, not exactly, but I couldn't deny the loneliness that had crept in, wrapping itself around me like a quiet ache that never went away. I had never been the type to seek attention elsewhere, nor did I think I ever would. But when someone notices the things about you that have long been overlooked, it does something dangerous. My driver had been in my life for years, but I had never truly seen him. He was always there, punctual and dependable, opening doors, carrying bags, knowing my habits better than I realized. He never spoke unless spoken to, but now, looking back, I saw the moments I had dismissed before. The way his eyes lingered a second longer than necessary. The way he always seemed to anticipate what I needed before I even asked. One evening, after an exhausting day, I finally acknowledged his presence in a way I never had before. I made a simple comment about the long hours my husband worked, expecting nothing more than a polite nod in return. Instead, he responded, not just with empty words, but with something that felt real. His voice carried an understanding, a quiet recognition of what I wasn't saying. It was startling, almost unsettling, how easily he read between the lines of my carefully chosen words. That conversation, insignificant as it seemed, stayed with me. It wasn't flirtation, and yet it felt like something more. He listened in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. There was no rush, no distraction, just his full attention on me, as if I were the most important thing in that moment. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. It was nothing, I told myself. A simple exchange, a fleeting moment of connection that meant nothing. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered otherwise. That night, lying in bed next to my husband, I realized that what I had dismissed as loneliness had turned into something far more dangerous, a craving for the feeling I had just experienced. Over the next few weeks, something began to shift, though neither of us acknowledged it outright. The casual conversations that once felt harmless started carrying an unspoken weight. His responses grew more thoughtful, his tone softer, more personal. I found myself lingering in the car a little longer before stepping out, drawn to the quiet understanding he offered. There was no rush in his words, no obligation to speak, yet every exchange left something unspoken hanging between us. At first I convinced myself it was nothing more than misplaced gratitude, appreciation for the rare moments when someone truly listened. But it wasn't just the words that had changed. It was the way he looked at me, the way his gaze lingered just a second too long, as if waiting for a sign. It was in the way his presence no longer faded into the background, but became something I was acutely aware of. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible. A fleeting touch as he handed me something, fingers brushing for just a moment longer than necessary. A glance in the rearview mirror that held something unreadable, something I pretended not to notice. The moments were small, insignificant in isolation, but together they built a tension that neither of us acknowledged, yet both of us felt. I should have stopped it before it went any further, should have recognized the quiet danger in what was happening. But instead, I let it continue, drawn to the feeling of being noticed in a way I hadn't been in so long. I told myself it was harmless, that nothing had truly happened, that a few stolen glances meant nothing. But deep down, I knew better. Every interaction carried an unspoken question neither of us dared to voice. A line had not yet been crossed, but it was there, looming between us, fragile and thin. I knew all it would take was one moment of weakness, one decision made in a fleeting second, and everything would change. And yet, despite the warning bells ringing in my head, I didn't pull away. I didn't tell myself to stop. Instead, I let the moments build, letting the inevitable creep closer, pretending that I wasn't already standing at the edge, waiting for a reason to fall. The night felt different from the beginning, though I couldn't quite explain why. The air was thick with something unspoken, a silent understanding that neither of us acknowledged, yet both of us felt. I slipped into the back seat, as I always did, expecting the usual drive home, but instead he hesitated before pulling on to the road. His voice was calm, casual, as he mentioned heavy traffic ahead and suggested an alternate route. It should have meant nothing. It was a practical choice, a small deviation. But something about the way he said it, the way his eyes flickered toward me in the rearview mirror, made my heart race. I didn't question it. I could have insisted on the usual path, could have pulled out my phone and checked the traffic myself. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned back against the seat, watching the city lights blur past as he guided the car down quieter streets. There was something thrilling about the change, something that made the ordinary feel different, more charged. I told myself it was nothing more than a shortcut, but deep down I knew better. As the car moved through unfamiliar roads, an unspoken awareness hung between us. He didn't speak much, nor did I, but I felt his presence more acutely than ever before, the way his hands gripped the wheel, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional glance in the mirror that sent a shiver down my spine. There was an energy between us that I could no longer ignore, a quiet pull that had been building for weeks, creeping into every interaction, every stolen glance. I knew this was dangerous, that allowing even this small detour was a mistake. But I didn't stop it. I let the moment linger, let the tension settle in the space between us. I wasn't just going along with the change in route, I was indulging in it. The excitement, the risk, the thrill of stepping closer to a line neither of us had yet crossed. A part of me wanted him to keep driving, to take me somewhere neither of us had to pretend anymore. Another part, the rational part, warned that I was already in too deep. But as the silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a detour in the road. It was a shift in something much bigger, something I wasn't sure I could come back from. The moment felt stretched, heavy with possibilities I wasn't ready to name. The tension between us had been growing for weeks, slipping into the spaces between our words, lingering in the glances exchanged when we thought no one was watching. But now there was no one else, no outside world pressing in, just the quiet hum of the car and the weight of what was left unsaid. My heartbeat was unsteady, matching the rhythm of my thoughts as I stared out the window, pretending not to notice how close we were to the edge of something irreversible. He didn't speak, but the silence felt intentional, filled with an awareness neither of us could ignore. There was no mistaking it anymore. This wasn't just another drive home. This wasn't just another night. I could have stopped it then. A single word, a shift in my posture, a reminder to myself of everything I stood to lose. But I didn't. Instead, I let the moment continue, let the air between us thicken with something electric, something reckless. It wasn't love, it wasn't even desire in its purest form. It was the thrill of temptation, the rush of stepping, closer to a boundary I had no business approaching. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful, yet there was an edge to it that sent a chill through me. He wasn't asking for permission, nor was he pushing. It was a test, a moment of hesitation waiting for my reaction, for some indication of what would happen next. And I could feel it, the choice hanging in the air, just within reach. I swallowed hard, my hands curling into fists in my lap, grounding myself against the storm brewing inside me. I had convinced myself for weeks that nothing had truly happened, that the stolen glances and lingering words meant nothing. But now, faced with the reality of where this was heading, I could no longer lie to myself. I had allowed this to unfold. I had let it build. A deep breath filled my lungs, shaky but necessary. This was the moment to turn away, to walk back from the edge before it was too late. Yet, as the seconds passed, I realized, with an unsettling certainty, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The first mistake should have been the last, but instead it became the beginning of something I couldn't control. What started as a fleeting moment of weakness turned into a routine, a dangerous rhythm that soon felt impossible to break. Each time I told myself it would be the last, that I would walk away before it went any further. Yet, with every encounter, the temptation became harder to resist. It began with small, seemingly innocent decisions, leaving the house a little earlier, taking longer routes home, lingering in the car for just a few extra minutes. The secrecy was intoxicating, the thrill of knowing I was treading forbidden ground, sending a rush through me that I hadn't felt in years. The guilt was there, lingering beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by something stronger, the sheer exhilaration of stepping outside the lines I had drawn for myself. Late nights became something I craved, stolen moments that felt like they belonged to a different version of me. The way he looked at me, the way he spoke in low tones only I could hear, made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in so long. The danger of it only made it more addictive. I knew what I was risking, but the weight of consequences didn't feel real yet, not when the desire was louder than the warnings in my mind. There were times when I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had allowed myself to fall into this. My husband slept beside me, unaware of the betrayal creeping between us like a shadow. I told myself I still loved him, that what I was doing didn't change that. But love should have been enough to stop me, and it wasn't. The secrecy became part of me, a mask I wore effortlessly. Smiling at my husband while hiding the truth, pretending everything was normal while my mind was elsewhere. Every text, every meeting, every excuse I made felt like a gamble, a test of how long I could keep my double life from unraveling. I knew it wouldn't last forever. A lie this big, this reckless, was bound to come crashing down, but instead of stopping, instead of pulling away, I let it continue, convincing myself that as long as no one knew, it wasn't real. The illusion of control was slipping through my fingers, unraveling faster than I could contain it. The secrecy that once felt thrilling now carried a weight that pressed down on me at all hours. Every conversation with my husband became a test of restraint, every glance over my shoulder an unconscious reaction to the fear of being caught. The paranoia crept in slowly, twisting its way through my thoughts until even the most innocent moments felt like traps waiting to expose me. At first it was small things, my husband's lingering stares, the way his questions felt just a little too pointed. He wasn't accusing me, not yet, but something in his gaze had changed. He was noticing things he never used to, asking where I had been, why I seemed distracted. His curiosity wasn't confrontational, but it was enough to send a chill through me. I reassured him, smiled, played my part flawlessly, but the act was becoming harder to maintain. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt suffocating. The staff, who had always been invisible to me in my day-to-day life, now seemed to be watching, listening. I caught fleeting glances, hushed voices that sent my mind into overdrive. Had someone seen something? Had a careless moment been witnessed? My mind played through every scenario, every possibility, each one worse than the last. My driver remained calm, unaffected, as if he didn't share my growing anxiety. But I knew better. His composure wasn't ignorance, it was confidence. He didn't live under the same roof as I didn't have to pretend day after day, hiding his guilt behind practiced smiles. He wasn't the one who had everything to lose. Lies had to be managed. I found myself rehearsing responses before I spoke, ensuring there were no inconsistencies, no cracks in the narrative I had built, but no matter how careful I was, the walls were closing in. Every moment with my husband felt like a test, every look in the mirror a reminder that I was balancing on the edge of something irreversible. The risk had been thrilling once, now it was suffocating. The paranoia wasn't just in my mind anymore, it was real, tangible, creeping into every corner of my life. And the worst part? I knew that no matter how tightly I held on to the lie, the truth had already started to slip through the cracks. The moment of reckoning arrived in a way I never expected. I had been so careful, so meticulous in managing my lies, ensuring that every detail aligned perfectly. But secrets have a way of surfacing no matter how deeply they are buried. It wasn't suspicion that led to the truth. It was a simple mistake, an overlooked detail that unraveled everything in an instant. A misplaced receipt, a careless text left on my phone, or maybe just the nagging intuition that had been eating away at my husband for weeks. Whatever it was, I saw the shift in his expression before he even spoke. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something raw and dangerous. He wasn't just questioning me anymore, he knew. The air in the room felt charged, heavy with unspoken accusations. When he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm, as if he had rehearsed this moment in his mind over and over. He presented the evidence with a quiet certainty, offering no room for escape, no space for denial. Every lie I had carefully constructed collapsed under the weight of that single undeniable truth. He had proof. My instinct was to deny, to grasp at any excuse that could soften the blow. But the words wouldn't come. There was no salvaging this. The look in his eyes told me that whatever foundation we had built was now reduced to nothing but betrayal and disgust. Rage simmered beneath his composure, a storm barely contained. His voice didn't rise, but the weight of his disappointment cut deeper than any shouted accusation ever could. He demanded answers, explanations that I didn't have, reasons that wouldn't matter. There was no justification, no words that could erase what I had done. The fallout was immediate. My driver, once my escape, was nothing more than a casualty in the wreckage. My husband fired him on the spot, his fury absolute. There was no negotiation, no hesitation, just an order, cold and final. And just like that, the man who had become my greatest temptation was gone. But it wasn't over. The real consequences were only beginning. My husband didn't look at me with anger alone. There was something worse. A hollow emptiness, a severing of whatever bond had remained. This wasn't just the end of my secret. It was the end of us. The weight of my choices settled over me like a storm that refused to pass. In the span of a single moment, everything I had built, everything I had convinced myself I could control, was gone. My husband didn't shout, didn't lash out with anger. Instead, he withdrew, his silence louder than any words he could have spoken. He looked at me as if he no longer recognized the woman standing before him, as if I had become nothing more than a stranger who had shattered his trust beyond repair. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt suffocating. Each room held memories of the life we had shared, a life I had so recklessly thrown away. The emptiness between us was unbearable, growing wider with each passing day. He avoided me, speaking only when necessary, treating me with a cold detachment that was more painful than rage. There was no room for apologies, no chance for redemption. I had destroyed something irreplaceable, and he had no interest in salvaging the wreckage. The fallout spread beyond our home. Word travelled quickly, as it always does in circles where reputations matter. Friends I had once confided in now avoided me, their judgment clear in their absence. The whispers followed me everywhere, low murmurs filled with condemnation. I had not only betrayed my husband, but humiliated him in the most public way possible. There was no coming back from this. The driver, the man who had once been the source of my reckless passion, disappeared from my life without hesitation. Fired on the spot, cast aside as if he had never existed. He didn't fight it, didn't reach out. He had nothing to lose, no reputation to uphold. He could move on, start fresh. But I was left behind, forced to exist in the ruins of what I had done. Loneliness crept in slowly, replacing the thrill I once chased. The guilt, once easy to push aside, became inescapable. I had traded everything for a fleeting moment of excitement, believing I could keep both worlds intact. But now there was nothing left, no marriage, no reputation, no escape. Only regret, heavy and unrelenting, a constant reminder that some mistakes can never be undone. The silence that filled my days was heavier than any confrontation could have been. There was no argument left. To have no words that could repair the damage I had caused. I had lost everything, my marriage, my reputation, the life I once took for granted. Now I was left with only my own thoughts, forced to sit with the consequences of my reckless choices. I had convinced myself that what I felt had been real, that the excitement was worth the risk. But now, looking back, I saw it for what it truly was, a desperate attempt to fill a void I never acknowledged. It wasn't love. It wasn't even about the man I had risked it all for. It was about the way he made me feel, noticed, wanted, alive. But that feeling was fleeting, an illusion that disappeared the moment reality caught up to me. I had been blind to the truth, believing I could control something that was always destined to collapse. The thrill had numbed the guilt for a while, but now, with nothing left to distract me, the regrets settled deep in my bones. I had traded something real for a fleeting fantasy, believing I could have both. But betrayal comes at a price, and mine had cost me everything. The loneliness was unbearable. People I once called friends avoided me, their judgment written in their absence. My husband, the man who had once promised to stand by me through anything, no longer even looked at me. And the person I had thrown it all away for, gone, as if none of it had ever mattered. I had been so caught up in the moment that I never considered what would happen when the moment ended. There is no redemption for some mistakes, no undoing what has already been done. The past is permanent, and I am forced to live with the choices I made. I see now that what I thought was freedom was just another kind of cage, one built with my own hands, trapping me in the ruins of my own selfishness. If I could go back, I would choose differently, but life doesn't offer second chances for betrayals this deep. Some mistakes follow you forever, and I will carry this one with me for the rest of my life.